Welcome to Breaking the News Plus on this Monday night. For the last week, the entire national media landscape has been talking about Minnesota. And they've been talking about something we all know far too well, but they seem to have just discovered it. And it's all the fraud that has taken place in our state in the last few years. It is no secret to Lou Raguse, who has covered it really since day one for KARE 11, and I will selfishly say better than anyone.
Thank you.
Knows it backwards and forwards. And of course, over the weekend, rather than take some R&R, Lou has made a couple of social media posts trying to explain things as he remembers them and has reported on with documents. And the one that you posted today, the title is How Much Money Has Been Stolen from Government Programs in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. That topic because President Trump has said billions of dollars has been taken. That seems a little bit high. But it's not just $1 billion. That's a little bit low. So what's the number?
And frankly, there have been other reports and estimates that have been much lower than that. And I think that for several months now, myself and AJ Legault have been consistently reporting on the air that it's at least $1 billion.
Okay.
And that's based off of the fraud convictions that have happened so far and the allegations regarding the programs that are currently being investigated.
Okay.
And so to start with what's been convicted so far, you know, the Feeding Our Future case is the big one, the first one. Well, it's not done, but but there's been some major convictions in it. So when Amy Bach, the executive director of Feeding Our Future, was convicted, the jury convicted her of facilitating the theft of $240 million.
Okay.
So let's start with that as a starting point.
Gotcha.
There was another trial actually a year before, the initial suspects that went on trial. They were convicted of stealing $49 million.
On top of her 240.
Yes. And because the big thing that a lot of people don't realize, and it is complicated, so I understand, but we call this the Feeding Our Future fraud conversationally. Mm-hmm. But really, there's Feeding Our Future is one nonprofit that facilitated the fraud. There was another one called Partners in Nutrition that we haven't heard nearly as much about.
Was that just the scale of Feeding Our Future, just kind of big-footed Partners in Nutrition, or it just got forgotten because...
No, nothing's forgotten. It's just that they charged Feeding Our Future first.
I see.
So not nearly as many people, and no one within the organization of Partners in Nutrition have been charged, and fewer suspects who received their money through that nonprofit have been charged.
But regardless, there's $49 million in Partners in Nutrition.
Yep. So of that $49 million, it was technically $47 million, but it doesn't stop there either, because there was another guy that I covered whose name was Haji Salad, and he admitted to, he pleaded guilty, stealing $19 million. His also came through Partners in Nutrition. So there's these two nonprofits that have fraud coming through them for what we call the Feeding Our Future fraud. Mm-hmm. You know, at least $240 million is proven with Feeding Our Future, and upwards of $60 million plus has already been proven with Partners in Nutrition. Well, if the pattern matches, they receive just as much money as Feeding Our Future. Okay. Just a shade less.
Okay.
And so if people continue to get charged and convicted under Partners in Nutrition, we could be looking at more than $400 million just from the meal program.
And the kids' meal program fraud.
Yep.
And that could still be charged.
Yes. Okay. And they have been. I mean, we just heard, defendants number 77 and 78 being charged within the last 3 weeks.
Okay. So that's getting into the $400 million range?
Yes.
So we're at...
and so let's be very conservative and just say 310 or so. Okay. Right? Then you also have to look at the fraud that has been charged by the state's attorney general's office. Okay. And the ones that I've covered especially well are the PCA or home health care fraud. Well, over the course of the last 5 years, they've charged about $60 million in fraud from that.
Are those Medicaid fraud cases?
They are.
Okay.
Like, say, through the Department of Human Services, if DHS noticed fraud, like the Medicaid Control Fraud Unit within the Attorney General's office is kind of like the police for that, or they did serve it at that role, and then they would go to court. So those cases have not been fully convicted yet either, but that's what has been done on the state level. Okay. So then, like, let's say we're getting closer to $400 million at this point. Now, beyond that, look at the rest of the investigations that are going on right now, which include the housing stabilization services, the autism fraud. There's 14 different programs that are basically on probation right now, where they're doing an audit and trying to figure out, who within those programs is legit and who's not. And when you look at the explosive growth in those and how much money is being spit out of those programs. These are the stories, especially what AJ has done.
The
over
HHS
the last,
frauds.
Yes.
Yeah, those big ones.
And those are in the hundreds of millions.
Right.
So all of a sudden, it's a $2 million program that all of a sudden is paying out $100 million. Like that's the scale of it. And that's how you can easily see the total going over $1 billion. And that's what Joe Thompson, who was the acting U.S. attorney and also the chief lead prosecutor on the majority of these cases, that's what he told us, that he's comfortable saying that they expect, when they're done, to charge more than $1 billion worth of fraud. But then what he says is, that's what we're charging and that's what we're able to prove. But there's more than that we just aren't able to get to and aren't able to ultimately prove beyond a reasonable doubt, which he believes puts the total into billions, plural. Let's just say 2 billion.
Okay.
So that's realistically what we've been reporting on.
And so will we get to a point, because this has taken on a political life of its own for whatever reasons there are. Governor Walz has to answer for the fraud. In my opinion, he's the governor. So that's the Minnesota, answerable person. But now it's taken on a level of interest with the Trump administration.
Yes.
He's the one that said billions of dollars. Dr. Oz is getting involved. Last week alone, there were 3 investigations into the state of Minnesota by different federal agencies. So coming at each agency to find fraud. So there is political interest. Is that why this number is being so debated?
Yeah, I mean, I think since July or so, when the 1 billion number was first used by Joe Thompson, I don't think it's been questioned. But once you hear the president, saying billions, plural, then all of a sudden it takes more of that political overtone where people are like, okay, what's accurate and what's not?
Right.
And so that's where, just with the knowledge and reporting that we've done, we're able to step in and say, this is what we can report, that has happened so far and what is expected to be happen or, reported to be on the horizon by both the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Attorney General's Office.
And there's been a bit, in my opinion, in the last several weeks of this, 2 weeks, I'd say, since this has been swirling. There was one day last week in the Wall Street Journal had not 1, not 2, but 3 opinion pieces on fraud in Minnesota. And there will be throwaway sentences in different national articles about no one in the media is talking about it. And it feels a lot like tail wags dog. You have done, by our count last week, hundreds or more stories on Feeding Our Future. Our entire investigations team, which you're a part of, I don't know how many HHS stories they did, but this has been work we've been doing.
Yes.
Without fear or favor to who it makes mad or happy.
And maybe we haven't been giving ourselves enough credit for the stories that we have done and reminding people. We're somewhat modest on, we don't remind people, by the way, this is the story number 101 that I've done on this topic.
Right.
But yeah, we've done over 100 stories on Feeding Our Future and another 50 plus stories on the other fraud program, the other programs that are under investigation for fraud in the state. And so it's, anchoring the news, you notice that it's almost a daily, for sure a weekly thing here. So yeah, we're used to it, but it seems like every new story that we do, I definitely hear from people that haven't heard of it yet.
Yeah.
So it's definitely now reaching a wider span of the public. And, you're right. That's where there's opportunity for people to make it a little more political.
Right. And I think it became, hyper politicized because you had the fraud allegations and convictions that we've already known about. But then they were being coupled into launching investigations, ICE coming into town for Somali Americans or Somali people.
Right.
And that took it to an emotional level that it depends on who you talk to of how fair that is, because you can't use a broad brush for all Somali people.
Exactly. And the vast majority of the defendants in these cases have been East African, mostly Somali, but also some Ethiopian Americans. And on the same token, I probably get more feedback and questions from people within those communities who are upset about it. And so that is another
upset about the fraud.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely something that's worth noting. And of course, anytime that you paint a single group of people with a broad brush, that is the definition of racism. So there's that too. But I think that that is what has led to the major political ramifications on a national level. But at the end of the day, there is fraud going on in Minnesota that needs to be addressed. A couple of the things that the state has done now recently, and there's plenty of room for critique because this fraud started to get exposed in 2021, 2022. But just now this year, they are auditing the 14 most at-risk programs. They're doing that. They added this inspector general with this additional funding for preventing fraud. And with that inspector general, they have found suspected fraud in additional programs that they hadn't before. So this work is being done beyond just, for a while there, it was like, the FBI led the way on this Feeding Our Future one. And then while they're doing that, they discovered the autism fraud. And our colleague AJ essentially brought the housing stabilization fraud to light. At the time that AJ did that first story, Governor Walz still wanted to add more DHS employees to approve more housing stabilization claims. And so that shows the disconnect between the state and what our reporting was back in May of this year.
And I hear you all day, almost every day, talking to sources on the phone with things that our viewers haven't even heard about yet. It's not over yet. There could still be more charged.
Well, there will be. Even within Feeding Our Future, which is the case that the first charges in that came down in 2022. But there's still more charges coming down in that. And we don't know if, like I mentioned, this entire Partners in Nutrition group, we don't know if the entire group from that is going to end up being charged or not.
Okay.
That could still happen. But the big next one is probably going to be the autism fraud because a lot of those are intertwined with Feeding Our Future. Okay. The dollar number is potentially even bigger than the Feeding Our Future number, according to Joe Thompson. And then the housing stabilization one is going to be a huge one as well because of, it ended up being more than $240 million that was sent out, and such a low percentage of that was legitimate, according to the investigation so far.
Right.
And so that could end up being close, over $200 million of fraud right there. So I think that at a certain point, there's only so many prosecutors that can work on these things and only so many people that feasibly can be charged, that they're going to need to do a little bit of prioritization and get the big players on some of those going forward.
Yeah, it's like organized crime. It's like we got to get to the big players. So from what you've been hearing, if it's even possible to answer this, has the fraud stopped? Has the leak been plugged and this is all investigation into what has already happened, or is it still happening?
That's a great question, but I think it was late October that they put the freeze on these 14 programs. I think you could say that it was happening all the way until late October.
Wow.
Yeah, if it has indeed stopped, that would be probably the date, because prior to that, all these programs were still sending money out, and there was still fraud going on.
What has surprised you the most covering this, if anything?
I guess just that it just wasn't obvious to those that send the money out right away. Just covering the trials for Feeding Our Future, I couldn't believe that the education department would just drive past one of these alleged meal sites and see that there aren't a million kids there. That just seems like common sense to me. And so just a lot of things move slower in government, just like in general, just the idea that you see on paper that there's all these meals allegedly being served and it seems obviously fake, but then you just run it up the chain and see, is there a technicality that we can try to stop this with, or what should we do here? Why not just jump up and down and scream fraud right from the beginning? That surprised me that it takes so long to stop. And
then the same in HHS, that one feels a little bit different to me, equally as bad, but that just looked like, fraudulent billing on a daily basis. Yeah. And again, no red flags. Maybe it's an argument for, let's not automate everything. Let's have an auditor. Well, I think a person. That's a lot.
Part of my analysis on all of this is that they measured success partly with the number of dollars they're sending out. If we need to, if this program really needs $100 million to help all these people that need housing assistance, then let's send the money out. We're doing a good job by sending the money out, rather than looking at it with a jaundiced eye and saying, if we're sending out $1 million, there must be people scamming us. There's two different ways to look at it. And I think the idea that this is a successful program because so many people need this money, maybe allowed all this fraud to happen in the first place.
Right. Maybe you need to go check.
You need to be a little skeptical.
Right. Like if you really are a politician and you want to go talk to all the people you're helping and
Yeah.
you find out you can't find any
Well,
of
and
them.
plus the politicians receive the positive feedback by passing the program and providing the funding.
Sure.
Like they're not, then their hands are clean. Then it's like, okay, I did my work, and they're not used to, I think, being held accountable for the fraud that occurs after they do that.
And just to be clear from what you had just said, there will be more action on this in 2026. We will see more people charged in autism fraud,
Housing stabilization. There's other programs too. Integrated community services. I mean, there's just so many of them that you haven't heard of.
Wow.
That are going to come forward here, and it seems like they're mostly coming as federal charges. There's a chance that some of them could come as state charges as well, though.
Oh, well, good work. We look for more in the future. And I know that we have talked about this on Breaking the News, but if you want a reminder, we have created, just in terms of receipts, so you can see full coverage from the local news organizations that have been there since the beginning because the national news outlets were not there. We have a Feeding Our Future page and a fraud page that shows all the reporting work that's already done. Not to say, hey, we did it, but just to get on record to say if you need kind of thorough coverage.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Lou Raguse.
And there's some big rabbit holes to go down once you start reading those articles.
That's true. And you and Lou will lead the way down the rabbit hole. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Breaking the News Plus on this Monday. We'll see you next time.